Ochelli Effect is sponsored by WallStreetWindow.com and listeners like you.
And now, the most underrated voice in all media, Chuck Ochelli.
May 7, 2024, allegedly, according to that thing we call a calendar, this, the Ochelli Effect, you listening to us most likely via the podcast, but we do broadcast live, and we are live as we speak on a Tuesday, Tears Day, and that's just the way it is. Now, I've got a couple of different things I got to cover tonight, and no, I'm not going to go deeply into the news, although I do have something topical to discuss with the guy who's been on the show before. More than happy to have him back, and in fact, I plan to have him back a couple more times in the next month or so to discuss a couple of different topics. Anyway, Jacob Hornberger. I do want to discuss books, and we're going to focus on one in particular tonight. We're going to get there, but before we go there, look, I've been talking about the presidential selection, the upcoming public appearances, how the campaigns are being run. But you know what? Even my friends in independent media not really discussing all that much. What's happening in the Libertarian Party? What's going on with the other conventions? Very much trapped in the supposedly two parties that are the major parties, but, the one-party reality that's out there, and talking about Trump and all that, but nobody's talking about anything else. And meanwhile, you actually have a little personal involvement here. So let's begin there. Tell us what's going on there, and then I'll ease into your introduction and get into the main focus of the discussion tonight afterwards. But let's start there. How would you like to explain that, sir?
Well, first of all, let me say it's nice to be back here with you, Chuck. It's always an honor and a pleasure. And I am a candidate for the Libertarian Party presidential nomination. I've been running for this nomination for more than a year. I announced back in February of 2023. And there's about 8 of us running. And unfortunately, the Libertarian Party circus is going to be held in Washington, D.C. in a couple of weeks. And the reason I call it a circus is because the National Party hierarchy has turned the convention into a circus. This is a nominating convention. The centerpiece of this convention is selecting the presidential candidate who the Libertarian Party delegates and in an overall sense, the Libertarian Party members feel would be the best exponent of libertarianism and the principles and philosophy of the party. But the National Party hierarchy has expressed pretty much distaste for all the Libertarian Party presidential candidates. They even said, the party chairman even said last year that she was blaming the severe problems of the party, and there are severe problems, on the lackluster group of presidential candidates. Well, I took umbrage at this. I think all 8 of us are fighting our hearts out. I disagree with the message of my opponents that they want to run, but I have the utmost respect for them, and I took Ms. McCardle to task for doing this. Well, now she's doubled down and invited Donald Trump and Robert Kennedy Jr. to be the feature of this convention. I mean, it can be called the Kennedy Trump convention.
That's
everything.
Weird. That is
bizarre.
That's a very weird situation because, and look, just for the record, Jacob is a guy associated with the Future of Freedom Foundation. I urge you to go over there and at least subscribe to their newsletters, by the way, because you can be well informed about a great many things that just happen to have something to do with, guess what, libertarian ideals. And I'm not saying that I agree with everything on the website or anything like that, but I've determined that the majority of my listeners are some flavor of libertarian generally. And therefore you will find something over there at I think it's fff.org. It is the regular way. I got it bookmarked, so I'd have to look myself right now. But I'm going to give you guys the link in the show notes so you can go over there and subscribe to the newsletter, and also check out Mr. Hornberger's blog, because you did write a little bit about this. I think you put it on your Substack as well, didn't you?
Well, I never addressed the political side at the Future of Freedom Foundation because we keep a wall of separation between my political activity and my foundation activity. Mm-hmm. So when people go to fff.org, they will not see anything about the Libertarian Party at all. Mm-hmm. And for that matter, I don't even address Trump or Biden. I keep a real strong wall of separation. They can go to my website at jacobforliberty.com.
Okay.
And that's my campaign website where I take Trump and Kennedy and Biden, Democrats and Republicans to task for what they've done to this country. And that's why I have a fierce objection to what the party hierarchy is doing by inviting Trump and Kennedy to address our convention. I mean, it's like going to war and inviting the enemy general to come into your camp and recruit soldiers and donations and members. And it's just bizarre that these two candidates who will be competing against our candidate are being allowed to come in here and say, vote for me, send me your donations. An intentional saboteur could not do a better job at sabotaging our presidential campaign. And yet there it is. And it's just
right. And a big point I'd like to make here is that, look, I said libertarian idealism. I didn't say anything about your political aspirations over there. I said you have to go to your blog to follow that. Right. But that's your website. My mistake. Either way, you partition this off and don't involve your foundation. You keep that clean because that is a separate issue from your own personal views and your own personal efforts, right? I mean, there is a difference. And guess what? How is it that the Libertarian Party is going to invite the Republican nominee to a convention? I don't understand the logic behind that.
Well, the logic is that the party for the last 20 years has moved in a right-wing direction, and the party hierarchy is right-wing.
Right.
The press refers to the Libertarian Party as a right-wing organization. They target Republicans for votes. They are strong advocates of immigration controls, which is one of Trump's signature positions.
True.
And so they have come to view Republicans as libertarians.
Okay.
And so they look at Trump as an idol. They go goo-goo-eyed when they see Trump. They idolize him. They want to feature him. And my hunch is that there's quite a few of them in the party leadership that are really looking for a position with the Trump administration. And by currying favor with him, giving him a featured spot, they can say, Mr. Trump, when you're elected, would you please give us a position in your administration? And Trump's almost certain to say yes. He'll promise anything to anybody. And I think that's what's going on, is that they realize that if they run the same kind of standard message they've run for 20 years, they're going to get the standard 0 to 1%. And so they might as well just throw in the towel on the presidential race and start vying for attention with Donald Trump to get into his administration.
Yeah,
I think that's what's going on. That's my opinion.
Look, and I can't argue with your opinion at all because that's the way it looks to me as an outsider, as somebody who's not necessarily as educated on. I mean, I'm sick of the whole system. The Libertarian Party has certainly moved to the right. I've talked about this, that, when I first emerged as a legal voter, right? I wanted to be libertarian. It's the only party I've ever registered with. I've registered as libertarian and independent only in my life, right? It moved to the right, though. It was not always as it looks today, number one. And number two, it's very strange to see this sort of like, I don't know, it's like the influencer grab. It's not about, necessarily what the ideals are or the fact that this is a separate entity from the two main parties. Okay, it's now about populism and just what is not even populism, but popularism. What's popular? Let's move that in there. I mean, Bobby Kennedy, frankly, is a little more akin to libertarianism in some of his stances, not all, in some of his stances, but nonetheless, it's just bizarre to watch that happen. And I know that legitimately you have a different point of view from the typical, definitely not one of the two-party or one-party system guys. So more than happy to get into that with you another day. Today I want to focus on something else because you're also an author.
Could I just add one more thing though?
Sure.
That you made a really good point about the one-party system. And that's the way I see it, that there's no difference between Democrats and Republicans. Unfortunately, the right-wing element in our party sees Republicans differently than Democrats. They see Republicans as libertarians, which is why they glorify Donald Trump and other Republican candidates. What I want to do, and what I'm arguing to the party, is that if you want to achieve a major breakout in votes, you got to change your direction completely, away from this libertarian support for socialism like Social Security, Medicare, school vouchers, education grants, immigration controls, and restore the founding principles of this party, the libertarian principles, the genuine principles, and that's what we need to do to get this party back on a foundation of rock rather than a foundation of sand in which it's based right now.
Right.
So I just wanted to add that. And go ahead. You were starting to say something about the book we're going to discuss.
Oh, yeah. No, I want to go there, too. But, just another quick shout out to Murray Sabrin, who was the only libertarian candidate that ever legitimately ran for governor in the state of New Jersey. I had this kind of discussion with him some months ago, too, where it was like, look, what has happened here, to the party? Maybe we could do that in a future discussion. OK, I'd really love to focus on it and talk about it, because to me, it's like the hijacking of what could have been a much larger libertarian party than it is. Significant, yes. And I appreciate it a lot more than the one-party system as it stands. But when you're completely hijacked by one of the larger corporate entities, I mean, well, welcome to America, I guess. It just is the way of things, the order of things, if you will. Anyways, but I appreciate all that. Believe me, I didn't want to bog you down in that discussion tonight, or sort of shock you with it or surprise you with it, because I really want to talk about this book. And a couple of things about it, honestly, because look, it's got a striking title to begin with, An Encounter with Evil. Let's just begin with the main title, An Encounter with Evil. Okay, the Abraham Zapruder story. Now, Abraham Zapruder, my listeners will be well aware of who that is. It is a household name in any household that listens to this show. That's for sure. And I've talked about the Zapruder film with a lot of different people, everybody from the individuals who say it's an absolutely legitimate piece of work to those that, I had David Mantic on not too long ago. His position is not that it is a completely honest documentation of the events in Dealey Plaza. Let's put it that way politely. Okay. I've talked about, although I didn't have her as a guest, I talked about Alexandra Zapruder's book, 26 Seconds, on this show. And clearly it's come up with so many different JFK assassination discussions on my show over the years. Not always the main focus, but always a focus of my show. Encounter with Evil. It's a striking title, and it's again another examination of the man and the film. So first, tell me how it is that you come to this title, why it is necessary to have this striking title, and without giving us everything that's in the book, and what it is that drew you to the Abraham Zapruder story and the film itself, outside of the obvious that it is the best known photographic record, whether you think it's legitimate or not or whatever. It's probably the best known photographic record linked to the Kennedy assassination. But aside from that, what is it that attracted you to this subject to write about it?
Well, many years ago, I read a book called People of the Lie by Scott Peck, a psychiatrist. He wrote a book that's much more famous called The Road Less Traveled that I absolutely loved. But People of the Lie was a very scary book. The thesis there that Peck developed was that there is evil in the world, and that phenomenon exists. Now, he was speaking as a Christian, but he says this is not just some esoteric concept. There is genuine evil in the world, and it concentrates itself in various areas, both in the government and in the private sector, and that it is a battle that we wage, Christians and others, against this force of evil. And I believe that. I believe there is evil in the world, and I believe that it was an evil force that took out John F. Kennedy on November 22nd, 1963, and that as part of the cover-up, this evil force was very, very successful, both with respect to the autopsy that the military intelligence establishment conducted on President Kennedy's body on the very evening of the assassination, and then the very next day by producing an altered copy of the Zapruder film, the film by Dallas businessman Abraham Zapruder of the assassination. Mm-hmm. And what drew me to this to this concept of evil in the story was Alexandra Zapruder's book, 26 Seconds. I've done a lot of reading and studying on the Kennedy assassination. I've written a few books on the Kennedy assassination, including this one. I've written countless articles. I've had conferences at the Future of Freedom Foundation on the Kennedy assassination. Mm-hmm. And so when I picked up her book called 26 Seconds, I thought it was just going to be a kind of an interesting read of the family history with the Zapruder film. And as I'm reading through it, I'm realizing there's much more to this than meets the eye. And she tells in the early part of the book that there was a family taboo that developed against discussing the Zapruder film in the Zapruder family. And she doesn't call it as a taboo, and she actually denies it was a taboo. She says it was just an unwritten code that you don't discuss this as a kid growing up. She was the granddaughter of Abraham Zapruder. And, well, that's exactly what a taboo is. It's an unwritten code in a family that you don't discuss things. So she decided to violate this code. And she did it with much trepidation, and rightly so, because when these family codes develop, these taboos, there's usually a dark secret behind them.
Right. Now, let me just interrupt you here because, look, two very similar concepts come up. One is that it's not dissimilar, this idea of darkness and evil. It sounds very similar to what's developed in Jim Douglas's book, right? JFK and the Unspeakable. That is the name that he gives for the darkness that jumps up and swallows Kennedy. But he also claims it's the very same unspeakable that, went and swallowed Gandhi and went and swallowed Martin Luther King Jr., et cetera, et cetera. But this concept that there is a dark force, no matter how you name it, is one thing that is consistent, not just in literature, but in our real world, because anywhere where power coalesces leads to the attraction of what we would have to plainly describe as evil elements that are attracted to it. One. Two, this concept of, the family talking about it, I find it interesting that she put out that book about a year or a year and a half before yours was released. It's interesting because the family had only ever contributed in minor ways to other people's works. They had begrudgingly give interviews, ever since Abraham Zapruder was gone. The family ever after, although they controlled the film, and there's a very weird story about how, the government acquires the film, pays them a huge amount of money for it, doesn't take the copyright away, and then they donate it. That whole story too. But anyway, it's remarkable to me that she wrote this book. That's why I brought it up, and obviously it was remarkable enough to you to get you to want to explore this a little more deeply. So back to this taboo that you're talking about, and look, lots of families have secrets. Not all of them are connected to one of the crimes of the century, though. In some cases it might be who's somebody's real daddy is. In some cases it might be, where did Aunt Ethel spend 10 years of her life that nobody knows where she was? Whatever, right? Dark secrets. Anyway, could you give us a hint about the dark secret that jumped out at you that you recognized before you started writing your book, or did you not know until you really started to delve into your research after reading Alexandra's work?
No, it dawns on me that there's something dreadfully wrong with this story as I'm reading her book. I'm like, my jaw's just dropping at the very beginning of the book, because I'm saying, this is ridiculous as to this thesis she's developing, because she very rightly fears going down this road. She says that she knew that there was going to be a tremendous adverse reaction in her family because of this unwritten code. You don't discuss this film. So she knows she's going down a very scary road. And she says she didn't know what she was going to discover. And I'm sitting there as I'm reading this saying, that means a dark secret. When there's a taboo this long, there's a dark secret here. So she was right to be scared. But what really hit me was that she finally says, well, I came up with the two reasons for the taboo. And again, she doesn't call it a taboo. Two reasons why this code developed.
Okay.
And one reason is because her grandfather felt tremendous grief over having witnessed this assassination, like paralyzing grief. And therefore, the family just could not discuss the Kennedy assassination with him. And therefore, this is how this code developed. That was one of the reasons the code developed.
Okay.
The other reason she gives is that her grandfather felt tremendous guilt at having received so much money, at having benefited financially from this film. He got paid $50,000 for the print rights, which is equivalent to about almost $500,000 today in inflationary money. And then he two days later, he sells all the rights to the film to Life magazine for triple that, like the equivalent of 1.2 million, something like that. And that he felt so much grief over this that it just could not be discussed in the family. Well, Chuck, I'm reading this and saying that is the most ridiculous thing I have ever read in my entire life. That this woman goes down this dangerous road to discover what's behind the taboo, and she comes up with this ridiculous thesis. And so the whole book is surrounding this thesis, and she goes on this lecture tour to promote the book, saying, this is what my grandfather's fears were all founded on. This is how the code developed. Well, I'm sitting there saying, I don't think so, lady.
So there's something missing is what you're saying. There's a huge piece of the puzzle missing. And make no mistake, for a listener who doesn't know, isn't aware, I would say a fair estimate would be that the Zapruder family over the years, over 60 years, has at the very least reaped about $100 million from this 26 seconds of film. Is that an unfair estimate in your mind? Because that's about where I'm at with it. Between the money that they got, the tax write-off, all of the different fees that they were paid when different video releases were made, various things that happened, I think they made at least $100 million over that 60 years. What do you think?
I'm not sure. That might be exaggerating but they got the equivalent of $1 million up front. I mean, they had annual installments to Zapruder.
Yeah.
But then later on, when the government seized the film, when it was in the National Archives and under an eminent domain proceeding, they got $16 million. Now, I don't know how that translates out in today's dollars, but let's say it translates out to $25 million. The fees that you're talking about was when they controlled the film after Life magazine gave it back to them for $1.
Right.
And I don't know what they were making in those films, but I would venture to say probably nowhere close to $100 million. I would say we're talking more like 30 or 40 million. Maybe.
Well, okay, but you know what it is? I'm trying to account for all the times that TV shows had to pay. Remember, every TV show had to pay them to utilize this thing for a certain time period. Unsolved Mysteries, I actually have one of the weird videotape things from when they used it. There's various documentary shows over and over again. They all paid them different fees. And, somebody would have to have the books open on this, really, but whatever it is, let's just say it is $40 million then, all right? If it was $40 million, still, it's a substantial amount of money to make over the course of half a century. I mean, you're talking maybe $1 million a year between 1963 and, say, 2013.
It's an extraordinarily large sum of money. But my point about her thesis is because remember, he dies, I think, in 1969. Mm-hmm. So he could have waived. He was getting paid on an annual basis by Life magazine for the original purchase price. He could have waived that money at any time. He'd just write Life magazine saying, I'm feeling so guilty, don't send me any more money. He never did that. And then he dies, and the family reaps this huge benefit, as you're talking about, renting it out, selling it. They could have waived all that money. So why does the taboo continue after this guy's death? That makes no sense. Mm-hmm. And then the grief, the guy was over there negotiating the film rights on Monday after the assassination. He clearly wasn't so grief-stricken that it paralyzed him from selling the film. And there were a lot of people that were grief-stricken over the assassination, including witnesses in Dealey Plaza. Right. No family had a 50-year-long code against discussing the film or even discussing the assassination because of that. And it's when I read that, when I said, you know what, I'm going to delve into this. And I read her book very, very carefully, and I figured out the real reason for this code, this taboo. And I said, I'm going to write a book. So the encounter with evil was Abraham Zapruder's encounter with this evil force that brought this taboo into existence, something that, in my opinion, she just lacked the intestinal fortitude to confront.
Well, that's a hell of a statement. So where did you begin your examination after this? Okay, so you read this book. You have this feeling you've got a missing piece. What did you decide to do next? I mean, did you try to acquire the best copy you could? Did you? I mean, tell us about that trip through your putting this together.
No, what I did was I already knew the basic parameters of what had happened with the Zapruder film, and that was based on Douglas Horne's work, including especially his 5-volume book, Inside the Assassination Records Review Board. Now, Horne was a member of the Assassination Records Review Board, the ARRB, in the 1990s. That was the agency that was charged with enforcing the JFK Records Act, which had come into existence as a result of Oliver Stone's movie, JFK. And when people learned that the national security establishment and other federal agencies were still keeping their assassination-related records secret, so they enact the JFK Records Act to get into secrecy. And so Horne writes this magnificent, 5-volume work, and part of that is making the case for the way they came up with an altered copy of this film to disguise what really happened in Dealey Plaza. So, and I'd already started with that parameter, but what I couldn't figure out is how does that lead to this code? And that was the mystery here. I wanted to solve this mystery. Now, I come from a law background. I got a law degree. I practiced law for 12 years in Texas. I was a trial attorney. And so my mind thinks like a lawyer. I'm trying to figure out what the heck is going on here. And I figured out that what happened was that Zapruder himself knew that they had produced an altered copy of his film. But he was stuck. If he comes out and makes a statement along these lines, they will crucify him. Now, this guy was Jewish. This is in Dallas, Texas. If he comes out with a statement right after the assassination that this is an altered copy of his film, they will go after him with everything. They will destroy him. A conspiracy theory, an alterationist. They would boycott his businesses. The conservative right in Dallas, which was the most conservative city in the world, in the United States, they would have gone after him with all guns blaring. So this man is faced with a very bad situation in his life. Does he go public with what he knows is a fraudulent film, or does he stay quiet and support the official version? And that was his quandary. And he had an altercation with Mark Lane, the guy who was investigating and questioning the official narrative, and it was not a pleasant thing. And what I write in the book is the reason it wasn't pleasant was because Lane was reminding this guy that he was standing on the truth and the principle and taking a lot of flack, being called a communist, and Zapruder had taken the easy way out, that he had gone with a lie. And this is what ends up destroying the man. And she made it very clear that his life was totally changed after this filming, that he was never the same again. He was a master at taking home movies. She said he never took home movies again. And so his conscience is bothering him throughout this thing. But yet there are hints of what happened. For example, if you watch the film, at the very beginning, it shows the motorcade turning left onto Elm Street. And then suddenly there's a jump. Just a dramatic jump where the next frame is showing Kennedy's limousine all the way down Elm Street. So you've eliminated what happened during the turn. And Zapruder had to know this because he watched this film his partner said, Erwin Short said he watched it at least 15 times during the weekend of the assassination. So imagine a guy that's looking at frames of his film, which is kind of interesting. When they took his deposition in the Warren Commission, they didn't show him his film. They showed him dark, like fog-ridden frames from his film. But even looking at the frames, he has to be able to see that there's frames missing. I mean, if anybody knew his film, it was him. So I dug up quotes by him and his assistant, Marilyn Sitzman, who was there with him at Dealey Plaza, helping him do this filming. She was holding on to him because he had vertigo on the pedestal that he was standing on. They both said, we started filming, or he started filming. He said, I started filming with the turn and kept filming, which is logical. If you want a memento for your grandchildren later in life, you're going to start filming immediately because you know this is the end of the motorcade. You can't afford to take the chance that the guy's going to speed up to 60 miles an hour and bypass you and start filming where you're filming his back. So it's logical that he would start filming the turn and just keep filming until he runs out of film.
Let's stick with it. Now, here's the interesting part about that I want to ask you about, because the story I've heard over the years is that he stopped and cranked his, because it was one of these things that was, you actually had to wind it up, the type of camera he had. You had to wind it up in order to keep the spring-loaded mechanism running, which pulled the film through. But he stopped and wound it real quick and then went back to filming. Now, I found that strange in that he had to have somebody hold him so that his vertigo wouldn't screw him up, and yet he's going to stop and crank the camera around. He didn't do that ahead of time. I always found that to be weird. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I know exactly what you're talking about. It's a ridiculous explanation because, as you say, he would already be prepared. This guy was as professional a movie maker as an amateur could be. He'd been taking home movies for years and years. It was just his hobby. He had a state-of-the-art Bell and Howell movie camera. So this guy knew what he was doing. He's going to have that thing wound up. But let's assume that this little story in here is correct, and it's really just a hypothesis. Why would he even start filming the turn? If he feels like he's going to run out of film or he's got to rewind and so forth, just start filming when Kennedy's halfway down Elm Street. Why start the filming, stop it, rewind it, and start it up again? That makes no sense because this was the end of the motorcade. Even his partner said, you're not going to get any film. He's going to be rushing out of there at 60 miles an hour. So it makes sense. And this is exactly what Zapruder and Marilyn Sitzman said. We started filming on the turn and essentially kept filming down the Elm Street. They never said we stopped filming and cranked it up. So based on their own words, the guy keeps filming. And it's logical that he's going to keep filming till he runs out of film. And he knew how much film he had. Like I say, this guy was as professional as an amateur could do. And so now when he's over there when they show him these frames, that they don't show him the film, which is really revealing. He's got to see something's wrong. Now, here's another very revealing aspect of this thing. Life magazine, the week after the assassination, publishes a story by a guy named Paul Mandel, who's one of their reporters. I mean, this guy was, very reputable, very prominent. Okay. So he writes a story on the Zapruder film, and which Life magazine now has custody of. And they're trying to explain the shot through Kennedy's throat.
Right.
The doctors in Dallas said he had an entry wound in his throat, which is obviously contrary to the official narrative where you have the shooter in the back, the accused assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald. So they've got to explain this wound in the front. And the reason the Dallas doctor said that is because there was just a small bullet entry wound into the throat. And this Parkland Hospital is one of the best trauma hospitals in the country. This is what they deal with, is gunshot wounds at this hospital. So Paul Mandel writes in Life magazine that there's an explanation for this. He says that the Zapruder film, which was now being sequestered, once Life magazine bought this film, they announced that the world would never be permitted to watch it. And Mandel says, but the Zapruder film shows Kennedy making a complete turn around, like a 180-degree turn, facing the school book depository when the shot that hits him in the front of the neck rings out. Well, there's no way to disprove this. I mean, they've got the possession of the film. And so the average person that's reading Paul Mandel's article is saying, I'll be darned. So that's how the shot hit him in the front of the neck. And the Zapruder film doesn't get released for another 12 years. Well, there's one man that would have been reading that issue of Life magazine, because that's the magazine that he highly respected and that he had sold his film to. He would have been reading every single aspect of Life magazine, especially the week after the assassination, and that's Abraham Zapruder. Now, if there's any man that would know that that is not what the film showed, it would be Abraham Zapruder. Why didn't he speak out? Why didn't he say, Mandel is lying? And my hunch is that what happened was that he went home and he talked to his wife, who Alexandra says was very street smart. She didn't have a formal education, but a very street smart woman. And he went home and he says, Lillian, they have lied about my film. They've paid me $1 million, over $1 million, well, whatever, $150,000.
Right.
And they've now lied about my film. What should I do about this? And as I write in the book, I think the street smart Maryland said, Abe, there are things that we can't understand, but there's something big going on here, and we just have to keep our heads down and keep our mouths shut. And I think that's what happened.
Well, I mean, what good are you going to do if they're saying it and they have possession of the film, right? And at this point in time, his claim is that he had no copy. So it's not like he could take his film out and say, look, this isn't what's in my film, right? The only people that have copies of this, allegedly, are the Secret Service, the FBI, and Time Magazine. Okay, that's it, right? Matter of fact, you see the print of the frames in Warren Commission volume, I think it's 18. Where they print the frames of the Zapruder film. One of them out of order, by the way. But, yeah, interesting stuff there. But, yeah, what are you going to do at this point? You don't have any proof. So what are you going to do? Call up their competitor magazine and say, Time Magazine has it wrong? Life Magazine has it wrong? Sorry, Life it is, not Time. It's Time Life. But anyway, you know, what are you going to do at that point, right?
Exactly. And you know what's going to happen. You see, they both came from Russia, and she was Jewish too. And Alexander describes in the book how, you know, Jews were under severe persecution in Russia. And that was one of the reasons why they were escaping and coming to New York and other parts of the United States. But the Zapruders went to New York and ended up in Dallas. But they have to conjure up images of what happens if they take on this huge dark force that is obviously surfacing here, where they're lying about his film. And he's very suspicious about the assassination because he's investigating it. She discloses in the book that he actually goes out to Dealey Plaza and he looks at the scene and he's trying to figure out what's going on. So this is clearly a very troubled man about what's going on. Now here's another factor is that there's a trial in the late 1960s. I think it was around 69 or so, 68, that involving a man named Clay Shaw. Mm-hmm. Where the district attorney in New Orleans, Garrison, was prosecuting Shaw for having supposedly been involved in the Kennedy assassination. But the overall theme is that this was a national security state regime change operation, right, which is the theme of Oliver Stone's movie JFK. It's based on this prosecution. And they subpoena Zapruder, who is called to the witness stand. And he is shown his film for the first time since the assassination, or at least what is supposed to be his film. Right. And it's a copy. It's not the original, and it's not the original copy. It's a copy of what I contend is the copy, the original copy. And the prosecutor asks Zapruder to identify the film, to authenticate the film. Is this your film? Mm-hmm. And his answer was fascinating. He says, well, something to the effect, I can't verify whether there's been frames omitted or not. It's possible they could have eliminated frames. Mm-hmm. Well, that was just like, that is not an unequivocal endorsement of the film. Once a witness says that, it's incumbent on the judge to say, well, you have not authenticated the film. We need the original, because copies can be fraudulent copies. So when a witness hedges on the authentication of a copy, the judge should have said, you bring the original, which would have been an original copy. It would have been a duplicate of what he said. There may be frames missing. Well, I think that's a very revealing statement, because as I state in my book, and this is based on Horn's analysis, there were 59 witnesses, 59, that said that the limousine in which the president was riding made a complete stop. or a near stop. Well, the Zapruder film, the extant film, the film we see today, shows no stop at all, or even near stop. Now, that's very incriminating. Obviously, if you have a film that's showing the driver stopping and then the headshot taking place, that looks pretty bad. So we contend, those of us that argue this, is that those frames were deleted in the altered copy, showing the stop. And that's what bothered Zapruder. And when he was testifying, he knew he was committing perjury, but he was having to hedge his bets. And I think in his conscience, he thought, well, maybe if I hedge my bet and say that maybe there are frames missing, I'm not really lying about this. It's a man that's clearly troubled with a troubled conscience.
See, and I'm one of these people who doesn't necessarily believe in the stop. I got to be honest with you, because eyewitness testimony is problematic and all that. But I'm not here to argue with you. I want to go through this story with you and find out what it is you found. It's interesting to me, though, that, yes, they subpoenaed the film from Life also, right? So they're supposed to bring the original film. Now, this leads to, by the way, copies of this thing getting out, which, you know the legendary story about that, how these copies, then the bootleg copies just started to emerge after the trial. You know about that as well, right?
Yes, absolutely. Somebody was. It appears somebody was making some unauthorized copies as part of this trial.
Oh, guaranteed somebody was, because only a couple of years later these things were circulating all over the country. In fact, I had my hands on one of them in the 90s, but the copy was made in like 68. Okay, probably a copy of a copy of a copy at that point, and it looked terrible. By the way, I mean nothing like what you see today. But even so, okay. So let's go back through this. So what you're saying is during the Shaw trial, he's got testimony there. Now they subpoenaed what should have been the original film, though, right? I mean, isn't that what they were after when they made the request and they had it sent to New Orleans?
Absolutely. When you subpoena something, they are required to bring the original, but they don't bring the original. They bring a copy. But it's my contention that the so-called original was the same as the copy anyway. I mean, that's okay. The fraudulent copy. So it wouldn't have made any difference. The original that I'm talking about is the one that is gone. We don't know what happened to it. And I know we're limited by time, so I'd like to jump up to Dino Brugioni and what was happening on the night after the assassination.
Sure, go ahead.
This really fills in part of the mystery as well. So in the late 2000s, Doug Horn is collaborating with an author named Peter Janney, who ends up writing a fantastic book called Mary's Mosaic, and they become friends, and they're talking about the assassination. They're on the same page. Well, Janney, in researching his book, discovers the existence of a former CIA official named Dino Brugioni. Mm-hmm. And Janney's father had been in the CIA. He had been a high official in the CIA during the Kennedy assassination. And so he contacts Brugioni, who's this very friendly, genial guy. And Brugioni, you can Google him, Google Dino Brugioni. He is the world's most renowned photographic expert ever. I mean, this guy, he was analyzing the film for the Cuban Missile Crisis. He's written books on photographic analysis. Everybody acknowledges that Brugioni was the best of the best at analyzing photographic stuff. So Brugioni says, well, Peter, come on over and have a chat with me. Come into my house. He's retired by this time. During the course of the conversation, the Zapruder film comes up, and Brugioni discloses something which he really shouldn't have disclosed. And I don't know whether he did it on purpose or whether he just innocently discloses it. But he says, oh, I had possession of the Zapruder film on Saturday night of the assassination. Mm-hmm. And Janney's like stunned. What? Because the official story has always been that the film went to Life magazine on Saturday afternoon after Zapruder had sold the original. He gives the original to Life magazine's representative, Dick Stoley. So, and it gets on a plane to Chicago at 3 p.m. on Saturday. Brugioni says, well, no, it was around late at night, 10 o'clock at night or something like that, that a Secret Service agent or two Secret Service agents bring the film in, the original 8mm film. And he says, they told me that I needed to make briefing boards, like poster boards with blown up frames. So he does that. And he watches the film over and over again. They even had to go out and get an 8mm movie projector, if you can believe that. Now, this is at the National Photographic Interpretation Center, which is the CIA's photographic center in Washington, D.C. Top secret operation. So the two Secret Service agents take the film. This is all detailed in my book. And they leave with the film. And Brugioni does his briefing boards and gives them over to his boss. On Sunday night, it turns out that another Secret Service agent shows up with a 16mm copy of the film. Now, that's significant because the film starts out as an 8mm film. All of a sudden, you have a 16mm copy. The reason I say that is because the only way you can get a 16mm film out of an 8mm film is by copying it on 16mm format. Well, once you have an 8mm film, you can't convert that film into a 16mm film. And the Secret Service agent tells the Sunday night team, I brought the film from Hawkeye Works. Now, Hawkeye Works was a top secret CIA operation located in the middle of Kodak's research and development headquarters at Rochester, New York. Now, there's no indication that Kodak was involved in what was going on here with respect to the Zapruder film. But according to representatives at Hawkeye Works, they told Brugioni, we can do whatever Hollywood can do to films. And they had everything there. So you have these two top secret operations that are totally compartmentalized. Brugioni was the second in command at NITPIC, and he was also the duty officer in charge. So when Janney says to him in the late 2000s, there was another operation on Sunday night with briefing boards, he says, that's impossible. I would have known about this. I'm the duty officer in charge. And Janney says, it's not impossible. They've testified to it under oath that team. And so they show Brugioni the briefing boards. There's only one set of briefing boards that's ever been disclosed. And they show Brugioni the copy of the briefing boards that are in the record. And Brugioni says, those are not my briefing boards. I don't prepare briefing boards like that. And they used to call Brugioni the briefing board czar because of how he produced his briefing boards. So here's the final kicker to this, Chuck. Janney and Horn show Brugioni the extant film, the film that we all see today.
Right.
And Brugioni is stunned. He's saying, no, that's not the film we watched on Saturday night. And he says, for example, the headshot, that's only one frame. And he's mystified by this. And they've got this all on videotape. He's passed away now. But fortunately, they videotaped the entire interviews with Brugioni. And Brugioni is there saying, there's only one frame for the headshot? And they say, yeah, there's only one frame. That's frame 313. And Brugioni says, no. He says there were multiple frames of the headshot. He says, because we were so fascinated because there was a plume of blood and brain tissue shooting straight up into the sky. And he says, we were just so stunned by and mesmerized by this that we had to keep watching it over and over again. Well, he said, that's not in the film. And so that was the clincher. Brugioni's not testimony because he was never under oath, but his statements as to what was going on with this film, that was the clincher. There's no way to avoid what his statement is with respect to the authenticity of this film.
Well, one strange question I have for you is when you say that a 16mm film showed up after an 8mm film showed up, is it possible that we're talking about the 16mm version that is produced when the film was originally printed? Because the 8mm film is literally printed as a 16mm piece, and then it's slit, it's cut down the middle, and then connected to make an 8mm film. That's part of the process that went along with that particular setup with the camera, right? So is it possible that it's a uncut version of the film, which, by the way, would be strange too? Or are we talking about a 16mm print that is literally 16 millimeters wide?
Okay, that's a great question. All right, the film starts out what's called 8 when he's filming. Right. And that's a 16mm film. The Bell and Howell he has starts out filming on a 16mm wide film. And the reason they call it 8 is because it would later be slit. You would film on one side, vertically down, and then you would turn it over to film on the other side. So you'd have two vertical strips on the same strip. And then you would slit it down the middle and connect the two strips end to end. So what started out as a 25 millimeter long strip of film would be 50 feet now of 8 millimeter,
right?
Instead of a 16 millimeter. So what happened in this case, he takes the film 16 millimeter format to Kodak in Dallas on the afternoon of the assassination. And he says, I need this developed. And they said, okay. So they developed the film. But they said, and he says, I want 3 copies. And they said, we can't do copies here. You have to take it to Jameson Film Company for copies. But they can only copy 16 millimeter. So we don't want to slit your film, because if we slit your film, you're not going to be able to get copies made.
Right.
So he takes his 16 millimeter film, the original film, to Jameson, that then makes the 3 copies. And so he then returns to Kodak with his original and his 3 copies, and they slit all 4 films down the middle. Now, how do we know that? Because your question is a very good one. What if he leaves the original film in a 16 millimeter format?
Right.
Well, we have statements from the Kodak people, they're cited in my book, saying we slit all the films down the middle, including the original one, which stands to reason, because Zapruder's entire quest here was to get as much money for this film as he could. And he had even told a Secret Service agent that. He made that statement saying, I'm going to get as much money as I can for this film. Well, it stands to reason that if he's going to get a bidding war going with the media, he's going to want to show them the original. It would be stupid, because the Kodak people also stated that they saw the difference between the original and the first generation copy. Now, this is the first generation copy, and they said you could clearly see the difference. And then if we then go over to Brugioni, this is the world's most renowned expert on photo analysis. He said, there is no question that I had the original. He says it was so clear and so crisp. Now, if there's anybody that can distinguish an original from a copy, it's Brugioni. And so he had to go out and get this 8 millimeter projector to show this 8 millimeter film. And he's saying this was an original. So when they take it to Hawkeye Works, the only way they can produce a 16 millimeter film is by making a copy. And that would be done with what was called an aerial optical printer.
Right.
And then you copy it, and then you make the altered copy. You make the copy the altered copy. You don't delete frames and omit frames from the original. You do that with the altered copy.
Right.
And so they bring it back. Why'd they bring it back in 16 millimeter format? Bad mistake, you would think. I mean, that's dumb. Well, for one thing, because it's all top secret. This is a CIA operation. Keep in mind that the CIA kept this secret for, 50 years or so? So they don't really have to worry about secrets getting out. But my hunch is the guy who brought it back, the Secret Service agent who called himself Bill Smith, who I have absolutely no doubts, as I read in my book, was actually a CIA agent disguised as a Secret Service agent, that he understands that they don't have an 8 millimeter format, a projector at Nitpick. He doesn't know that they went out and bought one late at night on Saturday night. So he's bringing the 16 millimeter format back to make briefing boards again, to make copies from this briefing board. So he figures, well, I'll just take it back in a 16 millimeter format since they don't have an 8 millimeter projector there. And that screw up is what became manifest 50 years later.
And that's a hell of a thing, because, again, you're not going to get that without making a copy from the original, because the only other way to have a 16 millimeter physical 16 millimeter piece is, like I said, from the original uncut. So, there you go. That has always been the wildest part of the story. Now, do we know what happened to? Because here's the other thing. I was also thinking, because you talked about how he was, a Russian Jew, and it clearly had a serious fear of government agencies. I'm sure, even though he knew the American government was different than the Russian. Point is, I doubt he would have argued with them when they wanted their copies too. So he gave them whatever copies they asked for, probably right away, but wanted to also retain his right to sell this thing, right? So both things had to be done right away. This is why there was a need for all these copies, right?
Well, that's right. Now, he had this mindset of that warped version of patriotism that the government is, you can trust the government. Mm-hmm. And so when he made these copies and he immediately gave them over to the Secret Service, he's trusting government, as Americans did at that time. That, the thought that the government would be behind this assassination was ridiculous. I mean, nobody even thought about that. Maybe Mark Lane did, but Salandra did too, but most people would never dream. There was a deep and abiding faith in government, and Zapruder had that faith, as she describes in her book. What I'm saying is that he trusts these people, he trusts the Secret Service, but all of a sudden he realizes that there's something going on here with his film, and he recognizes that it's much bigger than him, and that if he takes this thing on, now he doesn't know what's going on. He doesn't know that this. He knows there's a force out there, and I suspect he realizes this is a dark force, as James Douglas points out in his book, but he doesn't know what that force is. He doesn't know what's going on. I don't think he suspected that, this was a military CIA operation. He didn't know what this force was, right, but he was scared of it. But at the same time, he had this blind sense of patriotism, faith in government, in the American government.
Right, fair enough. So again, the name of the book is An Encounter with Evil, the Abraham Zapruder Story. And you want people to get it from Amazon? Should I give them the link there to get it?
Yeah, that's the only place it's sold. And we have it in audio format as well as Kindle and print version. Right.
It's a...
and I should say that...
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I should point out that C-SPAN Book TV did an interview with me on the book. And so if people want to get a little synopsis of the book, they can Google that at C-SPAN Book TV.
Okay, I'll find a link to that. I'm sure it's available online, probably at no cost. So I'll see if I can find a link to that as well. But any final words you want to put on this? Because we went through a little deep into part of the story about the film and about this dark force, the evil that would have been encountered. And obviously you're going to have to read the book to get the rest of it, guys. But, what else do we need to make sure people hear about if they're thinking about picking up this book? What is one other just final point you want to put on this?
Well, I think it's the point that you made earlier about James Douglas's book, JFK and the Unspeakable, that book is the first book I ever recommend to anybody who's getting into the assassination. It's a deep, profound book. It's a very spiritual book. Right. And the Unspeakable is this dark force. And it's that dark force that I emphasize throughout this book, an encounter with evil. I could have called it an encounter with the dark force. And I think that's what's important for people to keep in mind here, that the federal government was converted to a national security state after World War II. I have long contended that this was the worst mistake America ever made. This is a totalitarian form of governmental structure. They have omnipotent totalitarian powers like assassination, torture, indefinite detention. It is a dark, dark element in our governmental structure. And what we need to do to get this country back on the right road is dismantle that national security state structure and restore our founding governmental system of a limited government republic. And that's the real big message in all of my books and articles about the Kennedy assassination, is that the cover-up continues because this dark force is still with us.
And at all times, the system will defend and protect itself. Jacob Hornberger, once again, guys, the name of the book, just so you remember, and like I said, check the links with the show notes and all that, but An Encounter with Evil, the Abraham Zapruder Story. And
WallStreetWindow.com. Gold, silver, the stock market. WallStreetWindow.com.
Perhaps you're invested deeply.
Perhaps you're not in deep enough. Maybe you're thinking about getting started. WallStreetWindow.com. Michael Swanson, the brilliant author of The War State, understood these trends professionally for many years, and now he gives you the benefit of his knowledge. WallStreetWindow.com. Go there now. Go there now. Go there now.
Go ahead, caller.
Yeah, I'm interested in the truth about the JFK assassination.
Right. Well, what do you want to know?
Judy Baker's wild claim, Oswald girlfriend, she knew Ruby and Barry, cancer weapons. Really?
I imagine I could claim I have 4 wheels. It doesn't make me a wagon, but okay.
Oswald was on the kill team and trying to prevent the murder of John Kennedy. Come on now. Has a real expert on the JFK assassination looked into her claims?
Go to Amazon.com. Enter Judith Baker in her own words. You'll get results for a digital copy of a book where Walt Brown utilizes her own words and the known evidence in the case to get at, well, a different perspective, let's say. You can get Judith Barry Baker in her own words from the author himself, signed if you request it, by contacting Dr. Brown at KIASJFK@AOL.com. It's a fun book, and it actually dissects the many, many fantastic claims. Judith Barry Baker in her own words.
Thank you for all the great information.
The views expressed by callers, co-hosts, or anyone else who happens to get on the air at Ochelli.com do not necessarily reflect the views of Ochelli.com or Chuck Ochelli, and we are not responsible for any stupidity which might ensue. Thank you.
In Denial, Secret Wars with Airstrikes and Tanks by Larry Hancock. Secret wars became a staple of U.S. covert operations and are still happening today. Larry Hancock's book, In Denial, rips the cover off many of them. Using new files, it exposes things about the Bay of Pigs that no one has ever written about before. It shows why it really failed and why the United States did not learn from it. It also shows why other countries today are doing secret operations with more success. This is the book that puts what some want to deny into the light. In Denial, Secret Wars with Airstrikes and Tanks. Larry Hancock. For more information, go to larry-hancock.com. Pick up your copy of In Denial at Amazon.com in digital or physical form.
Let 'em know. Let 'em know. Let 'em know. Got to let them know. I'm bringing all shock like I'm Kid Rock, sipping Bud Light at the drag show. I'm bringing all shock like I'm Kid Rock, sipping Bud Light at the drag show. Erroneous method, the world's worst professional provocateur. Hit them like it's 2000 something and Beck is back on tour.
The Ochelli.com radio network.
Ochelli.com.
Revelation through conversation.
Do you like history? Real history that you were never taught in schools? Why? The Vietnam War, Nuclear Bombs and Nation Building in Southeast Asia by author Mike Swanson with new documentation never seen before that'll open your eyes to events that led up to this. Why? The Vietnam War, Nuclear Bombs and Nation Building in Southeast Asia, 1945 through 1961. Get your copy today at Amazon.com. Why? The Vietnam War by author Mike Swanson.